investment to make sure our growth in our beloved paradise of a city is well planned when it comes to transportation, traffic, and zoning. And joining us for more is former Sarasota City Commissioner Susan Chapman, Zach Murdoch of the Herald Tribune, and Kathy Antunes, host of The Detail on WSRQ Radio. Thank you all for joining us. Former Commissioner, let me start with you. Because Bobeth said something really important at the end of her story there, that despite these hirings, the city budget has actually gone down this year. But still, there are a lot of people you could imagine who are watching this right now who will say no to any kind of new city spending, to which you say what?
Well, I say let's talk about the city of Houston, Texas, that doesn't have any planning at all. And look what happened in Hurricane Harvey. There was so much concrete that the stormwater they did have wasn't absorbed. We already have that problem as well in the city. And the citizens are clamoring for better planning of buildings that are being built. They think it's important to our identity as a city not to be totally paved over. And we are a very vulnerable area, and we need planning, we need transportation planning to keep our quality of life in this city.
Zach, you covered that hearing recently. How contentious did it get?
Well, I don't know if you could call that contentious relative to some city meetings, but there was definitely some clear division among commissioners at the very final stage of the budget, which is a little unusual. You know, in the budgets that we've previously covered, that Ms. Chapman was a part of, at that point, you've gone through hours and hours and hours of discussion about this. Generally speaking, the commission's pretty much on the same page. That was definitely not the case. The mayor in particular and Commissioner Brody, that was in the report earlier, made very clear that right up until the very end, they had serious problems with those hires, and that definitely added a kind of strange twist at the end of a budget season.
Kathy, you are plugged into these debates there. You know, where was the mayor and Commissioner Brody coming from in terms of that? Have they always been raising questions about you know, any kind of new spending?
Well, you know, the budget, balancing the budget's very important, and taking on new future liability. I think there's concern about long-term pension liability in the city. However, I have to agree with Commissioner Chapman that we have to plan appropriately, and we haven't had a planning department. It was really the recession that created the budget cuts. And for a city of this size and importance, I think we need to be proactive. The planning department as it exists has basically been reactive and putting out fires. They don't have the manpower to plan effectively. So I'd say I disagree with these commissioners. We need it.
But also that was in Bobeth's story, Commissioner, that, you know, we've had almost a duplicate kind of system here, because we outsource some of the planning. So some people may be watching this right now saying there has been a component of urban planning around here.
Well, we've had some urban planning, but we haven't had urban planning that is making a difference for the citizens. When we went through the recession, we actually put a building official in charge of our planning department. And that building official looked at success at 8,400 building permits a year, not what the quality of the building is, the architecture, how it fits in the urban scape. All of those issues that are so important in planning were ignored. And when we get right down to it, Commissioner Brody, when he campaigns, didn't understand the importance of a planning department. He thought we shouldn't have one.
Okay. We are just getting warmed up on this discussion. We'll have much more on the return of the building department, the planning department, after we look at your first alert weather, so stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about Sarasota's new $202 million budget, specifically almost $300,000 for new positions in the city's planning department. Joining us for more is former Sarasota City Commissioner Susan Chapman, Zach Murdoch of the Herald Tribune, and Kathy Antunes, the host of The Detail on WSRQ Radio. Like everything, in whether it's city, county, state, federal government, there is politics here. The interesting part of this, Zach, is that Democrats rule basically in the city of Sarasota. So are you somewhat surprised that that at least some of the commissioners are talking about being fiscally conservative here?
Well, given the last year of the local political debate, let alone the national one and even at the state this spring, I'm not totally surprised by that. In a lot of ways, it's just kind of a function of the campaign that you all had this spring. It was that was basically every conversation we had at all of those commission candidate debates. But I do think it also reflects a little bit of what local officials often have to do, particularly if you want to continue in politics locally in Florida. I mean, to be in the very Democratic city inside of a largely Republican area, I think there is a lot at play there, politics-wise, about how you would want to try to handle city finances, perhaps with an eye to other things and wanting to have that kind of a record like we've talked about.
And Kathy, you do have a lot of older retirees in the city of Sarasota who are the folks who rail against everything that's happening in Washington in terms of spending.
Well, and I think, the greater point is value. Yes, people want to make sure their money's spent wisely, but for us not to have had a transportation plan for 20 years is ridiculous. And those things, you can't just pull them out of the air. Expertise, a good spend on expertise brings a return on investment to the city. And I think city voters appreciate that. Certainly neighborhood advocates that I speak with, that Susan references, see the quality of planning has deteriorated and we want to see it improve.
Susan, we have recovered somewhat from the financial collapse in 2008, but there are still big financial concerns here in the city of Sarasota. So why not be concerned about growing salaries and personnel while there are these other problems?
Well, first of all, the planning department was decimated during the recession. And we had more than 770 employees during the height before the recession, and we're still 100 employees down from that figure. So it's not like they're going out and doing crazy spending. They're doing things on improving quality of life, on responding to organizations such as STOP that always has these enormous citizen meetings where citizens are saying we are being overdeveloped without adequate planning. The goose that laid the golden egg in the city of Sarasota and this area is making it an enjoyable place to live. And when you're stuck in traffic for an hour and a half on the John Ringling Bridge, it is not an enjoyable place to live anymore. And those are things that are visiting us now without an adequate transportation plan, without an adequate plan for what is being built now. In terms of Democrat versus Republican, we have developer Democrats and then we have planning Democrats. These are the developer Democrats that are raising their voices because they think they're destined for higher office.
But still, Zach, there are other budget busters that Sarasota has to deal with, including the pension fund.
Certainly, yeah, the pension fund is one of them, and what you'll often hear the mayor and Commissioner Brody speak about too are some of the things kind of down the line, the to-do list, so to speak, of a lot of the various projects. We're in the heat of the beginning of the Bayfront 2020 project that's going to turn into the Bay Cultural District, something that Susan has talked a lot about financing on, that the commission is only just now going to be able to get a glimpse at. That's one of those really, really high dollar price tags that they're going to be looking at down the line, let alone some of the changes they're currently considering to that OPEB trust fund.
But here's the thing, it's crucial to get that project right, because if that project is done at a high quality, walkable development, the return in terms of taxable, the tax revenue to the city is going to be a terrific return on investment, not because they're a high tax city, but because they're creating value. And I think the View is a building that it's kind of a poster child right now for the concern about planning. We talk about being a walkable city, and the ground floor of the View was a tremendous opportunity to create some retail on the bottom that would have made things better.
So how does this all work? Let's say you now have new employees at the planning department. Some are dedicated to traffic, others building code. In and of itself, is that enough there to better manage the growth in the future?
Well, a lot of the developers who come into town, when you look at pictures of their projects in other cities, they're a lot better projects. We haven't insisted on quality in the city of Sarasota. And so the question is, are we going to have the kind of staff that insists on quality? Stephen Cover has an excellent reputation, an excellent history on great planning and great transportation planning. And he says he needs this staff to move forward to make Sarasota a better city. Now, what Zach talked about is this is about values. Are you really saving money when you reconsider giving free dependent coverage to your retiree dependents? We as the city commission and the last city commission said, no, we need a step away from giving free dependent coverage to people who are retired. That's an $8 million hit that these same commissioners who are objecting to $300,000 are all in favor of changing.
Zach, what kind of awareness is there within the city council now in terms of what that ticking time bomb may do to the city?
Well, there's a bit of a balancing act there in that there are some of these very, very big numbers that play out over the next few years, but you also compare that with what we at the Herald Tribune called the billion-dollar boom of the thousands and thousands of units in development that are happening downtown. And often the disconnect with folks out in the community and the people in the city planning department or county planning department is that as those projects rise out of the ground, no one is actually collecting any money on those until they're ultimately issued a certificate of occupancy, for example. And so there is roughly a 2.5 year delay between a building that you see existing in the flesh on the street to money on the tax rolls. And what you'll often hear at the city and county all over this area is that this crazy boom we see in development now doesn't actually translate to millions and millions of dollars in tax revenue until you get into 2020 and 2021.
Kathy, in terms of what we're talking about here, you so often hear people complain about the affordability of living in Sarasota and the traffic and all of that. Is there any realistic hope that having this new planning department is going to have an impact on what people see as kind of like a snowball, coming down the mountain?
See, I think the key piece is transportation. And Steve Cover, our new planning director, is well versed in how to create what's called transit-oriented development. Basically, if we have the ability to move through public transportation or biking or walking in addition to the cars, but if we can reduce car trips, we can create more affordable housing or access to areas that are affordable where people can come down and work in the city. Right now, the city really does not have a good transportation plan, and it's hurting us.
And in addition, when Steve Cover came, on his resume is an affordable housing plan that he actually drafted and completed and executed in another city, including a transportation plan and a form-based code. So he has done all the things that the city needs. He has done them in other jurisdictions. So that's what we have to do, is give him the staff in order to implement those plans.
All right, we have to take a quick break, and we'll return for final thoughts in a moment. Welcome back. Our guests join us right now for final thoughts. So, Susan, do you think that the mayor and Commissioner Brody made their points and now we turn the page and the planning department can do what everyone hopes it will do?
Well, with the city commission, everything is about 3 votes, and so they lost. And whether they make their point or not, or try to create controversy or not, this plan is going forward, and it's what the citizens of this community want. So it's going forward because it got the 3 votes. The budget was passed. And this is all a matter of values. They didn't complain about the police officers. They didn't complain about the parks people. When you're dealing with police officers, the legacy costs are much higher than planning department people. So it's about where their values lie. And their values aren't with planning and transportation planning and the things that citizens think are important for day-to-day living.
Zach, it seems like the push and pull in terms of the pro-development and the pro-control crowd, it continues with the Sarasota City Commission.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that'll always be a perennial debate. And now that we've gotten through some of this planning stuff in the budget process, I think it'll be a relatively quick turn right over to the new form-based code that the Urban Design Studio folks have been working on, which is just kind of a behemoth of detail that they're going to have to continue to comb through, and there's going to be a lot of input about those very things into that new code.
Kathy, you take calls from the public every day on issues like this. Where do you find most people at when in terms of planning and city spending?
I think people have seen projects that really concern them. You know, I've talked about the view. We talk about wanting to be a walkable city, and people appreciate that the built environment has a huge impact on our quality of life. We need good transportation options, and we need walkable development, and we need affordable housing. We've hired a great planning director. We need to let him do his work. He can't do it by himself. So we need these people to join him.
We will have to leave it there, but before we go, we want to say a few words about last night's topic, the Equifax data breach. The lasting impact of the breach will be years. 145 million Americans were affected, 44% of the U.S. population. Information released includes your Social Security numbers, driver's licenses, and credit card information. So we asked you for your reaction, and Paul says Equifax insecure systems allowed hackers to steal the information of 145 million Americans. And the IRS rewards Equifax with a shiny new $7.25 million no-bid contract. Simply disgusting. Stop doing business with Equifax. Find and punish the hackers. Lisa says not sure there's much that can be done about it unless many things go back to being done on paper instead of electronically. As long as everything is done electronically, everyone is vulnerable. And Guy says, what are you going to do? Get a new Social Security number? The toothpaste is out of the tube. Well, if you'd like to join the conversation about tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/mysuncoast.com.abc7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions. They're on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. We want to thank our guests for being here tonight, former Sarasota City Commissioner Susan Chapman, Zach Murdoch of the Herald Tribune, and Kathy Atunis, host of The Detail on WSRQ Radio.